My name is Christine Sherping. I'm a vice president here at Maccabee Public Relations. And today we are going to take a look into a crystal ball with our guest, Arik Hanson, to discuss some social media trends that we think will be particularly impactful for brands heading into 2021. So some of the things that we'll discuss today includes the future of some of the leading social media channels like Facebook, TikTok, and LinkedIn, discuss what emerging social channels we should keep our eyes on, the power of corporate blogs, and the latest in what's working in the influencer and brand partnership content space. And spoiler alert, influencer marketing is not going anywhere. It's predicted that brands are looking to spend upwards of $15 billion in influencing marketing by 2022. So a note that we will be recording today's session and a link will be shared out afterwards, so don't feel like you have to take any notes. Housekeeping, please mute yourself. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll make sure to address. Since we do have some new faces attending today, just a little bit of an overview of how we set up these conversations. They are conversations that will be very casual between Arik and myself. We'll spend about the first 20 to 25 minutes talking through some of the trends that we highlighted earlier, followed by a Q&A, and we want you all to be on your way by 12:45. We like to keep it a little bit short and sweet. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Arik Hanson. Many of you are very familiar with Arik, who is the principal of ACH Communications and the founder of the popular Talking Points blog and podcast. Welcome, Arik.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see, like I said, Christine said, nice to see a lot of, I was just rifling through the people on the call. Nice to see a lot of familiar faces, or names at least, for those of you who don't have your cameras on the call. So a little bit about me before we start. For those of you that might not know me, I'm an independent consultant here in the Twin Cities. I've been doing that for the last 11 years. I have 25 years plus in experience in the industry. I work largely in the social media world, focusing mostly on mid-sized and large companies. I've worked with 75 plus companies in the last 11 years. And the work usually revolves around, strategy, audits, content creation, training and coaching, which is popular right now, and influencer management, like as Christine said. So you can find me at, like Christine said, at my blog or the podcast I do with Kevin every month, or you can sign up for my e-newsletter where I share jobs, like the jobs at Maccabee, that it's always growing. That's a nice resource for you to look into if you're not subscribed to that yet.
Well, thank you again, Arik. So the first question that we'll start with is, unprecedented has been a word used many times to describe 2020. From a marketing standpoint, what are some of the shifts that you've seen from the beginning of the year to the end of the year?
Yeah, well, a lot, right? In the social world, obviously, one of the biggest ones has been the content shift because, most of us are still stuck at home and really stuck at home now. But in varying degrees over the last 9 months. And as that's happened, there's photo shoots are limited, commercial shoots are limited. So content's been at a premium. So you've seen a lot more brands being forced really to use more user-generated content. Walmart comes to mind. They were an early adopter. If you remember back to April, May, when everyone was really locked down, they were featuring the people in their stores all over the country routinely. In fact, they created a commercial with all user-generated content. Remember that commercial where I forgot the song they sang, but there was a song that they sang. So that's a big one. I would say number two, we saw live video blow up, right? Finally. Obviously there were brands that had used live video before. I'm specifically thinking of like Instagram, but not a lot until this year. And then this year came along and again, people were kind of forced to use it. So you saw a lot of brands that you never normally would have thought would have done that. They tried it and guess what? It worked pretty good. So that might be one of those ones. We're not going to talk a lot about live video today, but that might be one of those trends one of those things that stays around for a little bit longer than the pandemic. And then finally, and no surprise to anyone that's been mildly paying attention, but we saw a lot more brands weigh in on social issues on social media. And that is going to be one we will talk about in the next half hour here. But man, a lot. I remember Kevin and I talked about that in the podcast a couple of years ago when that was coming. Brands are going to start talking about social issues more. And Kevin and I were like, are you kidding me? No, there's no way a brand like General Mills is going to weigh in on some of these things. And now it's completely different. So 2020 was a big land shift, or a great shifting of the priorities for a lot of brands.
Definitely looking forward to the social, to the social justice piece here. You had mentioned about brands using a lot more user-generated content, which kind of leads into the next question. So there have been some brands that have been able to capitalize on some viral moments. One of the more popular ones from this past year was Ocean Spray, with a gentleman who just did a casual TikTok of him drinking Ocean Spray while listening to a little bit of Stevie Nicks. And Ocean Spray did a great job addressing it. I wanted to get your thoughts in terms of how companies can embrace a viral moment. That was a positive example. There have been some other not as positive. So would love your thoughts there.
First of all, I want to say that the biggest, my biggest benefit to that whole Ocean Spray experiment is it brought Fleetwood Mac to a whole legion of people that didn't know Stevie Nicks existed. So Christine, you'll appreciate this as a fellow Xer. Like, there's all these young people that had never heard of Fleetwood Mac probably before. Now it's like, oh my God, these guys are awesome. So I thought that was the biggest thing. No, I think if brands are going to take advantage of this this viral moment that may or may not be coming, and keep in mind, it probably won't be. I mean, this is like capturing lightning in a bottle, so you can't plan on this, obviously. But there are a few things that you probably should be doing anyways. And number one starts with listening. So again, Sherwin-Williams, we're never going to know what happened because everything's locked down because of HR rules and legalities, right? Because they fired the guy, so they can't say anything if they wanted to. So it's really hard to speculate, but it really couldn't have gone much worse, I would say. And my guess is they didn't even know that guy was doing anything. In the BuzzFeed article, if you look at, there's a great BuzzFeed article that talks about it where they interview the guy, and he talks about the fact he reached out to the marketing department, and it took them a month to get back to him. So again, we don't know what happened. We don't know the full story. There's two sides to it, but he's saying all these things like, hey, I reached out to the marketing department. They didn't say anything. Like, so to me, that says they weren't listening. They had no listening going on TikTok. And so there's step number one, right? Start listening on TikTok. See if you have any employees, first of all, that are major influencers on TikTok. They would have discovered that right off the bat. Like, oh my God, here's this guy. He's mixing blueberries with our paint. We don't want that, but he's other than that, he's doing a great job. He's attracting all this attention for the brand. And maybe we should reach out to him, you know? Mm-hmm. That's number one. But a close number two would be, and again, I speculate that this might be where Sherwin-Williams fell down, but where Ocean Spray probably excelled is that they probably educated their key leaders. So what was the difference, right? Like Ocean Spray, what did we see? We saw Nathan Apicata on that longboard, and that thing went crazy. And then literally, I don't know how many days it was, and people were impatient because they were saying, come on, let's go. They need to respond tomorrow. And it didn't take them, it didn't do it in one day, but I think they did it in like a week. Mm-hmm. And the Ocean Spray CEO, if you remember, he did a parody TikTok, right? The CEO. So to me, that tells me they were ready. Like he knew, or at least they coached him up very quickly. But my guess is he knew. They had mentioned TikTok before to him, like this is a platform we might be invested in at some point. That pre-work can go a long ways because like when the viral moment hits, it's going to be fast. And if you're coming at the executive set and you're saying, hey, there's this guy on TikTok and he's mixing blueberries with our paint, we'd like to approach him. And the CEO says, no way, what, my 13-year-old daughter's on TikTok, we're not doing anything on TikTok. Like there's where that pre-work would have came in handy. If you would have coached him and told him more about what TikTok is, how it's completely exploded in 2020 and how you could use that to your advantage, like they probably would have reacted differently. But I think if you do really those two things, mm-hmm. you're going to have a huge leg up on a lot of companies. Mm-hmm.
No, the pre-work piece that you just mentioned right now, Arik, is so important. Just knowing how quickly a lot of these platforms shift and change and monetize. Do you have recommendations in terms of like how to continue to share those type of trends with the different brands that you work with, just to make sure that they are informed, but not overwhelming?
I think, if you can just, the executive set's tough because, they get so much information on a daily basis. I mean, I remember working for clients where you could tell that I'm looking at the reports the marketing team is sending. So like they're inundated. So I feel like it's one of those things where you're better off, going through the people probably that have FaceTime with them. So I don't know if that's the CMO or the CCO or whatever senior vice presidents that have FaceTime with that senior executive team a lot. get time with them and just insert your little jabs here and there. Like, here's what we're seeing in the market, or here's an example of a competitor that's using TikTok. That's usually going to get people's attention. That's what I would do instead of sending them. Don't send them don't send them a trend report. Like, don't send them a huge report of things to look at. They're never going to look at that. Whereas if you get them face to face and you get even like 30 seconds to tell them about something that really matters, I think that would probably be the best way to go about it.
No, that's fantastic advice. Just knowing a lot of people on this call work in a marketing or communications function, so we're continually interacting with the C-suite. So that's always good to know, and how to best sell ideas before something may happen.
Yeah, right.
So at Maccabee, we're working more closely than ever with our clients, especially on the importance of their owned channels. A lot of times, so many brands are looking at the shiny bright objects with what every other brand is doing, not realizing that they have so much power within their social platforms, podcasts, websites, blogs that they currently are already existing. And speaking of blogs, you do predict that corporate blogs are making a bit of a comeback. So can you share a little bit more about like the reasons why you believe this, and any examples of brands who are doing a great job with a corporate blog and the stories that they're sharing?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to share my screen real quick. It's easier to share examples of this. Bear with me for a sec. There's a great study. Can everyone see my screen? Curtis, nod if you can. I can see you. There's a great study that the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth puts out every year, where they poll the Fortune 500 around what social platforms they're invested in. And you can see here is the chart, right? So it only shows the big ones. And you can see, by the way, TikTok, we'll come back to this, but 8% TikTok. But look at the blog chart, right? It was, in the 50s, the last couple of years, then it skyrocketed up to 77% this year. I wonder why that happened. And then if you go back even further, look at, it's been tracking this, for 10 years now. Look at back to 2015, 21%, way down to 21%, 2015. And again, way back up to 77% in 2020. So what happened here? The pandemic happened is what I think. And pandemic plus social issues. So like, I think what my speculation is that pandemic happened early, right? So all of a sudden brands said, wait a minute, we need a place to talk about COVID on a weekly or maybe even a daily basis with our customers, employees, vendors, stakeholders, all that stuff. And this is a big complex issue. We need more than just a Facebook post. Twitter's not going to cover it. We need a long form place where we can showcase different media, where we can showcase, more text. Where is that? That's the blog. So a lot of them, already had it up and running. So they dusted it off. And for the ones that didn't, maybe they started one. But I think that's what started it. And then after we got going, it was like, oh, George Floyd. Now we have another big sticky issue that a lot of brands had to talk about. Corporate blog, good home base for it, right? Then we had election, another big sticky issue that a lot of brands kind of wanted to talk about for the first time. Again, corporate blog. So there was a stack up of issues that really kind of, I don't want to say forced their hand, but it just made sense to do that on the blog. I think that's what was behind it. So case in point, Walmart. If you look back at Walmart's blog, and keep in mind, they don't really call it a blog, I don't think. If you ask the Walmart team what they call it, they probably call it a newsroom, which will please the PR people. But it's kind of both, they don't have, I don't remember quite, but I don't think Walmart had blog comments enabled. And if you look back at the UMass study, I think it's some crazy high number, like 80% of the companies that do have a blog, they don't have comments enabled. So let's be honest, these aren't blogs anymore. They're news sources, but sometimes they'll write it in the bloggy format, so whatever. We're splitting hairs, but Walmart was a great example. Early on, they were talking about, here you can see, talking about the pandemic and what they were doing from a safety perspective, what they were doing to keep employees safe, all that stuff. And then, more recently in October, they're still talking about stuff that is relatable, right? So talking about the new era of retail, that's pandemic related. They're talking about these Walmart drive-in movies that are happening in some of their stores, that's pandemic related. They're still talking about the pandemic. It's just, how it's impacted their world. And they were also talking about, a whole host of other ideas as well. Closer to home, US Bank was another example, right? They were, very personally involved in the George Floyd murder earlier this year. A couple of their locations were burned to the ground with the rioting. And so they had that angle, but they also had the angle of the fact that they are right smack dab in the middle of this issue as a bank in terms of kind of how do we address the issue of systemic racism? Well, they're right in the middle of that, lending money to people, right? That's always been an issue for minorities and people of color. So, okay, they got a big stake in that. And they came out and said some pretty big things after George Floyd. And they've done a really good job of backing that up. And they talked about that on their blog. So everything from what those plans were, which again, that's bigger than a tweet, right? And to like, hey, they're going to promote this Greg Hunningham to chief diversity officer. Let's talk about Greg and feature Greg more. Like, again, that's bigger than just a social media post every now and then. Like that lends itself better to a blog. Target, again, in the backyard, another great example. Their Bullseye View blog. Many of you have probably seen that before. They've been using that for years and been doing a great job with it. But in 2020, it felt like they even put more emphasis on it. And they talked about more issues like, the pandemic, social justice. You can see here the steps they're taking. And, and they also give them a chance to talk about, that reopening of that Lake Street store that was, again, just totally trashed during the riots. So I thought that was really smart. And those are just a few examples. There's a ton of them out there, 77% I just showed you. And those are just the Fortune 500, keep in mind. But, it's kind of like, I think it's going to continue because the own content really never went out of style. And there's a lot of advantages to that own metric, like you said, or the own bucket, like you said, Christine, around you can measure it better. It's on our platform. So now it can transfer into leads potentially or revenue sources. There's just a lot of advantages. And I think companies kind of realize that a little bit more in 2020, combined with that pandemic and social issue component.
Absolutely. And just now that we're on the topic about social issues, 2020 was absolutely a year where a lot of influencers and brands were taking a stand for some very important issues, all of which you had, just shared. What do you see about the likelihood of brands taking a stand in the future on social, or what have brands that have taken a stand, the ones that have done it well versus ones that seem just to join it just because it's a popular thing to do?
Yeah, right. Good point. So again, I got some slides to share. Number one, I think this concept of taking a stand on social, again, 2 to 3 years ago, I would have laughed at that kind of, and I did laugh at it. There's no way companies are going to do that. 2020 happened, everything changed. And now I would argue heading into the new year, it's almost like table stakes, right? Because of stats like this. And I got this from eMarketer, but there's study after study that say the exact same thing, that people want brands to have a stance on this stuff. They want to buy from brands that take stands. And they think and if you're silent, they notice, and they're going to vote with their pocketbooks. So they're telling us this. Whether that plays out, we're starting to see. I think we'll start to see more of the results of that in the new year. But my guess is, I think it's table stakes. So, and there's a number of companies that have been doing it for a while, right? So Patagonia, obviously, with climate change and the environment. Ben & Jerry's with social justice issues, all over that. They're probably the case study. Levi's with getting out the vote this year, they kind of focused on climate change too, but they've also been a big voting advocate. Those companies, well known, a lot of people do it. I mean, that's just kind of well known. But this year, did you ever think, that Citi, a big bank like Citi, would post this post on their blog? Like, look at that post. And keep in mind, look at who it's from too. Mm-hmm. The CFO of the company. So that's pretty strong, right? Again, in our backyard, Medtronic, another big conservative company. They're not used to taking big stands on stuff, right? But here they are. Jeff Martha, CEO, right out in front. Another big conservative company, even bigger, United Health Group, right? So you're seeing like some of the most conservative companies there are taking these big stands and then backing it up too. United Health Group has been backing it up. US Bank has been backing it up. They're not just saying stuff. Then they're putting their money where their mouth is. And, is it happening overnight? No, but it's getting there. And at least there's some progress being made. And I think, the biggest thing right now is really going to be, now that these statements are out there and now that, we know kind of where some companies stand, it's going to be like, what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Have you followed up on it? So like US Bank, yes, I think they're doing a pretty good job. United Health Group, yes, they're doing a pretty good job. What about some of those other companies? Are they backing it up? That's what people are going to want to see, especially as we revisit George Floyd in 2021 with the trial. that's what's going to come up. So that's our job as communicators is going to be, I mean, we have no control over what the company does, obviously, but we can counsel, leaders on like, hey, this is what people are going to expect. And they're going to expect that. They're going to expect big actions, probably bigger than we can give them, but they got to show some kind of progress on on these issues that you're weighing in on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Accountability is absolutely key. And I think you just hit upon like a really great point, Arik, with the fact that people will continually be asking for what those updates are, that it's not a flash in the pan. Like, yes, we check the box and address it in real time. So it will be interesting to see how some of these brands continue to share the news about some of the initiatives that they took from 2020. We have a question from Karina. Hi, Karina, about the blog content. So do you see, Arik, that brands will continue to kind of focus on big issues? Or do you think that they'll use their blog for more educational content, brand storytelling? Is it a mix?
Yeah, no, I think it's a mix. I don't think it'll be just all, it hasn't been for the ones I mentioned. It's not just all big social issues. It'll be a mix. I mean, they'll have their pillars just like any other brand would have, right? But I think that, that's like pandemic now is a pillar for the foreseeable future, right? Like that's probably for all of 2021, really. That's a pillar in 2021. Social issues is probably another one, right? Whether you want to get drawn into it or not, you have to almost acknowledge it. So like they're going to be there, but yeah, you're still going to talk about your products and services. You're still going to talk about probably your employees. You're still going to talk about, in your culture, like there's still going to be other pillars. So it's definitely a mix for sure.
Of course. And then related to the blog content too, we have a question from our friends over at Stone Arch Creative about how some of these organizations, and I would assume like maybe some organizations not as like well known, like the cities, the Walmarts of the world, how are they driving people to their blog? It's great that they're expanding their content, but how are you sure, how do you make sure that's compelling enough content for people to read? So I guess two questions. How are people driving people to the blog? What are some of the best methods there? And how do we make sure that the content, which takes time to create, is being read?
Yeah, well, the first one is tricky because you can't, and this is where it behooves the people that started the blogs years ago. Like, I'm just thinking of like my friend Kevin at General Mills. Like they started that Taste of General Mills blog a long time ago, and he's been curating that thing for a long time. And now it's so when big things like this happen, he's going to reap the benefits because he's already got people reading that thing. Whereas if you're just starting one in 2020, like it's not the worst thing in the world, but you're going to struggle to gain a huge audience very quickly because it's not, you just don't put it out there and all of a sudden everyone's reading it. Mm-hmm. That said, you do have some tools in your toolbox. Like you can use paid media, so you have tools like social media advertising. You could use something like Outbrain. I mean, there's tools you have. If you're working with influencers, that's another good, opportunity to drive traffic. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is, I like to tell when I work with a client, we're building a blog, it's like, eventually that organic search should be your number one traffic driver. That's what you're going for. And that just doesn't happen overnight. That takes years. So like, it's hard. It's like with podcasting, it's a long build. It's not like you just throw it up there and everyone's going to read it right away. Like it's going to take a while.
Absolutely. I think that's like, a good thing, like when you're putting down the goals, like what the short-term goals are, but just knowing that it will take a little bit of time to kind of build it to what some of these existing brands, what they've already been able to accomplish.
Yep.
So know that both Maccabee and ACH does a lot of work in the influencer marketing space. And a lot of times, we've seen influencer marketing more as a tactical problem solving piece to help launch a product or service. And at Maccabee, we're seeing more influencers, as almost its own like media channel, just because of all the things that they're able to do in terms of creation, amplifying, etc. So as we look into 2021, what are some trends or roles you're seeing influencers taking on the new year?
Well, I think the biggest one is probably that you're seeing more influencers take on this social good tactic instead of always social selling. So pre-pandemic, I mean, that's what we saw, right? Like everyone was trying to sell something, and to the point where people are actually getting kind of sick of it. Like people are like, we were just almost getting to the point where people are like, yeah, this influencer marketing thing is not working for me. I feel like we were pretty close to that, and then pandemic came, and things kind of shifted, right? So we saw stuff like this, like who partner with all these influencers around the world. This guy, by the way, is a virtual influencer. I don't know if anyone's heard of this guy, this Knox Frost, real Knox Frost on Insta, but virtual influencers, if you've heard of that, this is one of the people that is doing that. But this who thing was a big thing with influencers, so that was a good example of social good, right? You probably heard of this one if you've been paying attention to TikTok at all, but Charlie did the big distance dance where she partnered with P&G and Feeding America earlier in the year. That was a nice one because, and we saw a few of these early on in the pandemic where like specifically a TikTok influencer would partner with like a combination of a big company and it had a philanthropic component to it. And I thought that was really nice because, I mean, that's a nice partnership, right? And that's getting at the social good thing, right? Like P&G, they were probably purely going for social good there because it's the P&G brand versus one of their sub brands. But we saw some of that early on. And I think we'll see more of that just because it's an easier entry into the influencer marketing space versus just selling right out of the gate. Selling. Like what do we tell people when we say go on social media? Like don't sell all the time. Mm-hmm. So why do we do that with influencer marketing? It doesn't make any sense. But I think the other trend we'll see in influencer marketing is actually brands. I think will, and I'd be interested to hear what you say about this, Christina, with who you're working with at Maccabee, is like they'll probably be more intentional about the influencers they work with. So, i.e., they're going to try to find more diverse voices, which makes all the sense in the world. Why weren't we doing that before, right? Like, duh. Mm-hmm. But we weren't. So now we're here, and okay. So that seems like an obvious one to me. Like, you got to find some diverse voices, man. And we kind of saw a version of that, like after George Floyd, where like I remember some of these big Instagrammers, like I think DeRusha did this, where he turn over his Instagram account to all these diverse voices for mm-hmm. like a week or whatever. Like a number of people did that. That's going that direction, right? Like we need to give some of these diverse voices a platform, and like brands are in the ultimate position to do that because of the pocketbook. So that I think we'll definitely see more of that.
No, absolutely. We've definitely seen the same shift with a lot of the brands that we work with in terms of influencer marketing. The great news we are already, trying to address, but even more so, like as we think about how we can make as much of a positive impact, how that comes to life. And something too that we've also seen with influencers and influencer vetting, it has been a little bit, of a misnomer in the past where you wanted to be very careful and choose, a safe influencer. But because of this past year and the reason, or like, so many influencers realize that their platforms could be used for a much broader purpose than selling just services or products, that you have, or that we've seen a little bit of more concerted effort where it's like, what? If they align with our beliefs, that is a better mix. And I think influencers are realizing like, if they're dropping followers because someone might not necessarily believe in their political stance or whatever social justice issue stands, that they would rather speak to the audience that does believe within that or does believe them because it's just more powerful. So yeah. Those are some of the things that we're seeing.
Yeah.
We've hit upon this a little bit, but nostalgia, especially as we're in the holiday season and, there is a lot of nostalgia like within this like time frame. You did mention that this could be a big social marketing tool moving forward in the future. So can you tell us a little bit about this and how brands can really like work this into their programming?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with, how many people have seen this show, right? During the pandemic, probably a decent amount if I saw virtual hands raised. I think the nostalgia thing is has everything to do with comfort. Like everyone's frustrated with this pandemic. Everyone's hurting in some way, it seems like. And we're craving comfort, and so nostalgia gets at that, right? That's part of the reason Cobra Kai was so successful right now, because if I'm not mistaken, this came out a while ago. It just took off this year. That's why, right? I think. What about General Mills with they did their monster cereal boxes in like throwback style this year, right? That was all about nostalgia. That's about comfort. They saw that coming. They saw the trend developing over the course of the year. My guess is they tried to capitalize on that, right? Airbnb did an interesting kind of partnership with Fresh Prince and the 30th anniversary where they rented out the Fresh Prince house, which was kind of fun. And again, playing on the nostalgia angle, right? And the nostalgia angle is not all like these are kind of like aimed at again, Christine, I'm picking on us, but like they're aimed at our generation, really, you know, like the
Mhm.
Xers a little bit, but like, it's not always the Xers, right? Millennials, like here's an example from Joanne Fabrics, and I won't play the video, you can look it up, but featuring Phyllis, right? The Office is not, that's not aimed at me, that's aimed at millennials. That's their nostalgia. And that's kind of weird to me because The Office wasn't that long ago, you know, it's not like that was 40 years ago. That was like, what, 10 years ago, maybe 15 at most. So it doesn't have to be all that long ago, you know, for it to really matter. And I think a lot of brands have a chance to do that because you don't have to do like a big spot with Phyllis, right? Or you don't have to do a Will Smith thing. Like, what about just doing nostalgia in terms of like your old logos or like these brand milestones that happened a long time ago that you could bring back? And oh yeah, people remember that. Like, you have nostalgic moments probably that you can take advantage of. You just need to think about how you could use them and if and how you could use them. But now's the time. Like, this is a great time to be thinking about that because people are just craving it.
Oh, that's a great point. And as we're talking about all these different social platforms, Arik, are there any platforms that you see that are emerging that will be reaching more of like a major status soon? Let's start there first.
Yeah, good question. Yes, and I think it starts with Twitch, surprisingly. And I know people are going to laugh, but and I'll get to the elephant in the room in a second. But the stats on Twitch are pretty compelling. I mean, 40 million. You can see right here. I won't read them off even, but like it's you know, it's obviously huge with like Gen Z and millennials, right? Um, you know, that joke at the end there. I can tell you, my son is 16 and he's, you know, obviously on video games 24/7. And he's got that Twitch stream going all the time. And the weird thing is, like, the millennials, you know, and the Gen Z, whatever my son is, you know, they take a lot of flack for a lot of reasons, but they're, you know, what they're amazing at doing is like multitasking. Because like, if you go in like a gamer's room, he or she usually has like, you have the game up, right? Then you have the Twitch stream, which is insane, by the way, if you've used Twitch before. Then you probably have your phone open and maybe it's on FaceTime with a friend. Like, you got like 4 screens going at any given time. It's a side note, but like, it's insane to me. But Twitch is, you know, Twitch is kind of growing mainstream, and like, this was the tipping point for me a little bit. Is if anyone saw AOC do her Twitch live stream right before the election, where she streamed this Among Us game, which is hugely popular. I don't play this game, but it's obviously very big. And this was a game changer for me because, like, I know she's younger, obviously. She's trying to play to a younger demographic. So I get the strategy. But like, this thing blew up. Like, it wasn't just on Twitch. It started to show. I started hearing about it. She started talking about it on Twitter. So it's crossing over platforms. But the Twitch thing is just huge. I mean, you see brands like KFC are involved through their influencer partnerships. Honda just unveiled their Civic on Twitch, for God's sakes. Like, that's a product launch on Twitch, you know, like, that's huge. So that's, you know, the Twitch one is what comes to mind for me in terms of, like, you know, it's not going to be Facebook next year or anything, and it's not going to work for all brands, but it's worth you know, poking around with. Now, on the flip side, though, I would say everyone's probably thinking, like, what do you mean? What, TikTok's going to blow up in 2021, Arik? Like, that's what's going to happen. I don't think so. Like, I think because, yeah, more brands might experiment with it, maybe, but like, look at that Fortune 500 stat I gave you, right? If TikTok blew up so much in 2020, wouldn't more than 8% of the brands be on it? Like, that's pretty low. And that's the Fortune 500. Those are the people with resources. What about the mid-sized and smaller companies? Like, they don't have any resources. Because the thing about TikTok, you have to remember is, and for those of you that use it a lot, you know, like, it requires a ton of creativity to play well, right? Like, you got to be wildly creative. And a ton of resources, right? To shoot one of those things is, you got to come up with a script, a plan, you got to shoot it, you got to produce it. Like, it's like a full-scale video shoot. That's all. Where are you gonna get that time from right now and that money? Like, that, social media teams are already strapped. Like, you can't say, hey, let's get on TikTok next year. Okay, great. Yeah. What are the 4 things we're gonna stop if we do that? That's what I'd be asking. And so that, I don't see TikTok becoming this huge mainstream platform for brands. I just don't. For consumers, absolutely, sure, but not for brands.
Those are bold words, Arik.
I know people are going to disagree. Do you disagree? What do you think?
No, I think it's totally fair. Actually, a question that I do have for you as we're talking about emerging platforms or platforms that we think are going to be taking off in 2021, just knowing that it does take, as you mentioned, a lot of resources for people or brands to be successful with some of these platforms. What are some ways for a company to strategize? Like, okay, we already have a pretty decent presence on the more traditional channels like Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. How should they think about, okay, whether or not it makes sense to do a pilot program or a little test and learn with an emerging platform? What are some of the ways that you counsel your clients on this piece?
Well, number one, I don't think they need to be on the primary channels. Like a lot of times it's like, the first question is like, do we really need to be on all these channels? And oftentimes the answer is no. And it might even be like the big channels. Like it might even be Facebook. Like, do we really need to be on Facebook right now? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, every brand's decision is gonna be different, but like Twitter, another one, right? You really need to be on Twitter right now. It's a kind of a cesspool. Like, is it working? I don't know. Like that, I think that's a big question first. But like second, I would say is like, if so, let's say you do want to experiment with TikTok next year. Like, well, I think number one is like do a ton of research. So like find out if you have employees on there, so you're not Sherwin Williams 2.0. That would be first. And then number two, I would like just spend like, I don't know, a month minimum, probably, like just playing with it. Even if you have a young person who's very adept at it, like they might be adept at using it, but they're not adept at using it as a brand probably. So like there's a difference. So I would just get used to like, find out what, like if, let's say you're in you're in retail or whatever. Like, okay, well find out what other retail accounts are very popular. Find out what people what are people talking about when they go to the mall? What kind of TikToks are they making at the mall? What kind of TikToks are they making at Best Buy? I don't know. Like there just a ton of research and finding out how people are using it. So when you enter and you do create that first TikTok, it like makes sense. So it's not just like completely off base out of the chute.
No, absolutely. And when you're thinking about some of the traditional channels too, something that at Maccabee, that we've been counseling a lot of our clients on is the importance of LinkedIn. I think sometimes LinkedIn can be the one that is like, oh, just put whatever you think that a resume would have or that type of information, where it could be so much more robust, or joining communities, etc. So that's been something that we've been seeing a little bit more, doing a little bit more counseling in on that piece too. Have a question here about, do brands should be listening on Parler?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, obviously it's a conservative platform, right? It's designed to target, people with conservative point of views. So I never think it doesn't make sense to listen, So like, especially if you're a big brand, you already have a listening platform set up. So you're using Sprinkler, Khoros, whatever. Like just set up another, try to see if you can get that ad. Now that might not be a possibility on the big platforms at this point, that with APIs and stuff, but it probably will be eventually. In the meantime, you can just like spin over there, once a day and just see what people are talking about. I don't think it never hurts to listen, but do you need to be engaged in there? My guess right now would be no, because it's gonna be dangerous. But again, it's a blanket statement. It depends on what you're trying to do, I guess.
Absolutely. And then back to TikTok, Kelly has a question about if you're familiar with the Washington Post TikTok page, and if yes, what are your thoughts on it?
No, I have not seen that, no. But I wouldn't be surprised. The Post has been pretty active on social in the past, and very creative. So I would be surprised if it's good.
Kelly, we'll get back to you on that one.
Thanks, Kelly.
Arik, we have covered a lot of different topics today. What is the one thing that you like to leave us with today?
Well, the one thing we didn't talk about is my favorite platform, and that's LinkedIn. We didn't talk about that at all. Strange, right? But I think two things I noticed on LinkedIn that I think are going to carry over into the new year is that, number one, video completely blew up, or not completely, but blew up more on LinkedIn in 2020. So case in point, General Mills, again, I'll pick on General Mills, but they saw this trend early, or were an early adopter on the trend to use more video on LinkedIn early. And they were doing it with these Zoom interviews, right? So again, I know you're thinking right now it's December and you're thinking, oh, big deal. Like everyone's doing Zoom interviews. Well, not back in May, they weren't. And oh, by the way, General Mills is a pretty big conservative company. Like they're not used to doing that and moving that fast, but kudos to them. They did. And they had a few of these Zoom interviews. They pivoted to a little more video early on. And I thought, that was a smart move. We saw brands like McDonald's, who were doing this one-on-one interview series with their CEO. Like, this is really interesting, and I've kind of been watching this pretty closely the last few months. So the video thing on LinkedIn is real. And then the other thing on LinkedIn is, this trend of executives being more active there, which is huge this year, obviously. Again, pandemic, social issues, there's reasons. But, if you looked at, I think even last year in my trend presentation, the trend was like employees are garnering a ton more engagement on LinkedIn than the brand pages are. And now it's the executives. So you can see Mike Roman here, CEO at 3M, perfect example. The arrow is pointing to the engagement scores. Like, look at his engagement scores versus the 3M page. I mean, the 3M page is 1.5 million followers. Like, it's a huge page. He doesn't have 1.5 million followers. Jeff Martha, Medtronic, same thing. Look at the Medtronic page is 1 million followers. Look at their engagement scores, and then look at his. So people want to hear from these leaders. They've wanted to for a while. I mean, I've been screaming about this for 5 years, and so this was finally the year, right? Like 2020 was the year a lot of them got on board, and good. And I think 2021 is going to be the year where more do, because this is the inflection point, right? Like, I think a lot of people will say, hey, look at Mike Roman's out there, Jeff Martha's out there. Maybe we should think about this, So I think you'll probably see more of that in the new year.
Could not agree with you more. It'll be fun. Maybe we'll have to do this in mid-December of 2021, and look back at all the trends that we discussed if they were going to happen in 2021.
Yeah, see if we're right.
Exactly. Well, we're coming up at the end of our time. A huge thank you to all of you again for joining us today. Big thank you to you, Arik, for the great discussion. Our Sharper Angle series will be held monthly, so more information will be coming out about our January series here soon. But on behalf of Maccabee, thank you again, and have a wonderful holiday season.